Welcome to NCIX Tech Tips. This is an SSD, and today will be an SSD buyer's guide. It's been quite a while since the last time we looked at SSD. It was actually back when we did our SSD versus hard drive comparison, where we took the then recently released SandForce 1200 controller, which was in the Vertex LE, and we compared that against running what was at the time a fast consumer-grade hard drive and how much of a difference there was in your system performance using an SSD or solid-state drive versus using a hard disk drive or an HDD. So now we're going to be taking a look at some of the new offerings on the market, including new SATA 3 6 gigabit per second interfaces, higher density flash, as well as smarter, more advanced controllers, and helping you decide which SSD is right for you. So let's start with a brief history lesson. On my far left, your far right, we have the OCZ Vertex, which was the first truly high-performance SSD product from OCZ. It featured an Intelink controller. It used MLC flash, which is the consumer grade of flash memory on it. It has a SATA 2 interface, which is pretty much typical at the time. SATA 3 hadn't really been released yet. Okay. Then let's talk about what replaced it. So the successor to the Vertex was the Vertex 2. It added a few things. It used the same flash, the same SATA 2 interface, but instead of using an Intelink controller, it used a far more advanced controller. It used a SandForce SF1200 controller, which actually enabled it to compress the data that was being written to the flash, enabling higher performance because it was essentially able to write more data, but it eliminated the bottleneck of how quickly you could write data to the flash by compressing it first. So you were writing less, but actually writing more. And then it had to decompress it as it pulled the data off the drive. So this was a huge innovation at the time. But other than that, there hadn't really been any technology changes. So now, moving forward, we have the current product. This is the OCZ Vertex 3. It uses an even more advanced SFF2281 controller. It uses a SATA 3 interface, so it's capable of double the total bandwidth of a SATA 2 interface, and it also features newer flash. So it features 25 nanometer flash, which enables costs, which have gone down overall in the time these three products have been on the market, to be eventually lower for the end user. So I want to briefly cover the 4 realistic consumer solutions that I believe are available on the market right now. So first of all, number 1, you have advanced controllers featuring SATA 3 interfaces all over the market these days, without data compression. So what this enables is better performance when you're using non-compressible data. Remember, not all kinds of data can be easily compressed down to smaller amounts and then written to the drive. Some, they just don't really get much smaller, and in those cases, a compressed data controller like a SandForce controller is not going to perform quite as well. Now, the next option is obviously something like the Vertex 3, where you are compressing the data, and in most desktop scenarios, that will provide the best performance you can get out of a single drive and a single controller. The next option is taking 2 drives and running them in RAID. Most especially gaming-grade consumer motherboards do feature some kind of built-in RAID, and if you're using an Intel controller particularly, you have excellent performance out of the onboard RAID controller that's built into your motherboard. Now, RAID has the disadvantage of not enabling the trim function, which in Windows 7 allows the SSD to self-maintain and keep itself running in a fresh state. So it combats performance degradation, but with most modern drives, really actually including all of the ones in front of me right now, it's not a major concern because they are going to self-clean whenever you're not doing something on them anyway. So RAID gives you more performance without breaking the bank necessarily on a higher capacity drive. Finally, you've got integrated RAID solutions, such as the Revo Drive X2. Now, the Revo Drive X2 still uses SandForce 1200 controllers, that is Vertex 2 controllers, but it's got 4 of them. So yes, 4 Vertex 2 controllers is still capable of outperforming a single Vertex 3 controller in some scenarios, and particularly before the Vertex 3 hit the market, this was a fantastic solution. Personally, I'm very excited to see what comes out in terms of a Revo Drive style product with SandForce 2281 controllers. Although we may have a hard time finding a RAID controller that can even keep up with Vertex 3s that can be easily built into a consumer product. Which brings me to solution number 5, which I don't really consider viable reliable for most people, and that is buying $500 to $700 RAID controllers, hooking up a bunch of super high performance SSDs and getting completely unrealistic read and write speeds out of them in excess of 1 to 1.5 gigabytes per second off of a single storage array. I have done this on my video blog, you can check it out, but as I said, it's not really realistic for most people. So the how to pick an SSD segment of our video today is going to be aimed at people running a single SSD drive, because really that is 99.9% of users out there, whether you're putting your SSD in a laptop, in which case you're going to want a 2.5-inch drive, or whether you're putting your SSD in a desktop, in which case you're pretty much going to want a 2.5-inch drive, although there are 3.5-inch solutions on the market. They're generally priced pretty close to the 2.5s, which usually come with adapters anyhow. So step number one, I believe, is pick a capacity. Pick a capacity that you can live with, because the reality of it is SSDs are still quite expensive in terms of dollars per gigabyte compared to a hard drive. They offer way better performance, light years better performance, but you do have to contend with that additional cost. Now, this is a 50 gig Vertex 2. It's a very high performance drive, but personally, I never really saw the point, because as soon as I've installed Windows 7 on a 50 gig drive, I've installed a couple apps, and then one game, remember games are up to like 10 gigs these days for a single game, it's full. And now I have to put everything else that I could possibly want on my computer onto my hard drive, which should just be pure storage. So I believe you should pick a capacity first. My personal feeling is that the sweet spot starts at around 120 gigs and ends at around 240 gigs before you start paying a lot more for that extra capacity, in which case you might as well just buy more drives and RAID them together, because SSDs are so reliable. Even if you run them in RAID 0, you don't have to deal with quite the same risk factor that you did with hard drives. So the next one is figure out your usage scenario. Are you going to be writing a ton of incompressible data? Most types of data, especially in a desktop workload, are going to be very compressible. Now, compression has the advantage of the higher performance, and it also has the advantage of being a little bit easy on your flash, because if you're writing 100 megs of data to the drive, but you actually only write 75 megs of data, and then when you pull it out you expand it again to use it, well, you're not using up the write cycles of your flash quite as quickly. This isn't something I've touched on yet, but as flash density increases, that is, we get higher capacity drives that are cheaper, the reliability of the flash, this is an inherent part of the technology, actually goes down. So we're going to need more and more advanced controllers that can compress the data more and more in real time to take advantage of newer flash technologies that are going to enable higher densities. This is just a reality we have to live with. So compression allows you to essentially write more to your drive before the flash inevitably dies. Now, I don't want this to sound really scary or anything, because most SSD drives come with 3 to 5 year warranties, and they include mean time between failures of hundreds of thousands of hours, so don't stress about it, but it's definitely a factor to take into consideration. Will you be writing compressible data or non-compressible data? Don't forget the intangibles. So intangibles are things like firmware updates, things like the kind of support you can expect to receive from the company if your drive does go down. So that is something that I always bear in mind when I'm purchasing anything, and my history with OCZ in particular, as you can tell, they're a bit of a theme of the episode, actually started with a PowerStream power supply. I had a PowerStream 520. I had to RMA it. They took excellent care of me, and it's been nothing negative since then, so I have no problem recommending them as far as intangibles go. And the last but not least is, once you've decided on a capacity, what type of drive you want, and you have not forgotten about the intangibles, when you're choosing something, you gotta choose where to buy it. So personally, of course, I recommend NCIX, and yes, that is the end of my shameless plug. So the question for the end of this episode is, which SSD, if you were going to buy an SSD, would you buy today? Would you buy a Vertex 3, which is currently more expensive due to the additional technology that goes into the controller? Would you buy a Vertex 2, which is still on the market and still a very high performance drive, but is a little bit aging and is cheaper as a result? Or would you go for something more exotic, like a RAID card with multiple drives off your onboard controller, or even a Revo Drive style product? Which would you buy today? And finally, when are you going to upgrade to SSD? What is your personal threshold? Thanks for watching NCIX Tech Tips.